I just sat still because I was so shook up about it. This massive animal and what it actually was when looking at it. It's a real experience for sure.
I think they're firmly established in the food chain. They're obviously breeding. I was 12 when I first saw the black panther, and those cats are still reported in the same area now. They're here to stay.
Welcome to Big Cat Conversations. We speak directly to people who've encountered one of Britain's big cats. We also discuss the bigger picture. I'm Rick Minter, and thanks for joining me. Hello, and welcome to episode 120 of Big Cat Conversations. And here we are with our first one of 2025. So if you're listening on schedule, a Happy New Year to everyone. Let's hope we make some progress on the British Big Cats topic through the coming months, and thanks for your continued interest in the podcast. For this episode, I'm pleased to say we have another ex-police officer, and he is Andrew, based in County Durham in northeast England. And he was with the Durham Police Constabulary from 1990 till 2015. And that spell included some big cat incidents, as we'll hear. So Andrew, welcome, and thanks for coming on the show.
Yes, no problem. It's nice to be on.
Can you just brief us on what your police activities and duties were? Because you weren't a wildlife liaison officer, so you wouldn't have had direct experience of dealing with animal issues, animal welfare issues.
During the period that I had my encounter with the black cat, I was on traffic and I was on firearms in the county. So I used to cover the armed response vehicle.
Okay, and so when did big cats first come into your life?
I would say late 1970s, 80-ish, there were sightings of a puma, apparently in Durham. That hit the papers, the headlines. So that was the first time I'd really heard about big cats in the UK.
Yeah, in your region as well.
Yeah. Obviously, I heard about the ones down south, Devon. And 1988, I was talking to a Royal Marines officer who told me that he'd been in charge as a sergeant major in charge of a sniper team, and they had shot something. They'd sent a sniper team in, Exmoor, and he said the shot it had been taken away, covered up, and I asked him what it was. He just told me, said, he was quite flippant. He said, well, to be honest, it wasn't a dog and it wasn't a cat. And I took cat as meaning that it wasn't a domestic cat rather than a leopard or something similar. So I wish I'd really pushed them further, but that was how we left it. And that got me interested a bit as well.
Well, it's come out since that they did admit to shooting something but not knowing the outcome. But he said they shot something which they were on a vigil for.
Yeah, they got rid of.
How did you manage to bump into him?
I was on exercise with the Marines in Holland, and I was speaking to him on exercise.
Gosh, okay.
Yeah.
So that was, you were in the Marines before you were in the police force?
Yes.
So totally credible, basically. It was one colleague to another.
I believed him, and as I said, I wish I'd asked him more now, looking back.
Okay, thank you for that. That's a good start. Very interesting. And when you read about the ones in the region that there was sort of pumas being reported in County Durham, did you believe that? Did you think it was possible?
Yeah, it's anything's possible, isn't it? Locally, we used to have it's called Lambton Lion Park. We had Stanley Zoo, we had Lambton Lion Park lions, there were big cats. Always a possibility of things escaping. I'd never heard anything else, but the main thing was just locally was the puma that had been seen in Durham and had been seen in quite a few places locally.
Okay, so then you went into the police, and we'll deal with your sort of main sighting then, the main event. So take us through it. What happened?
Yeah, basically, it was about February or March, and I believe it was 2003. I took my dog for a walk. I had a little Lakeland Terrier, and she'd had pups, and I kept one of the pups, so I was carrying the pup. I walked with them to a place known locally as Sherman Hill Moors. And it's basically a hillside, and to the right of the hillside is a stand of gorse bushes. And to the left, it's woodland. It's basically ash trees and hawthorns. and it's linked by a thin strip of hawthorns at the top of the bank. So it's quite a thin strip of, say, 3 meters deep, and it must be about 3 meters long. At the time, I was probably about 40 meters away from that strip of hawthorns leading from the gorse into the mature woodland. And my dog used to chase rabbits, so she'd gone into the gorse bushes, and when she was excited, she would squeal and yelp. Basically, she started yelping, and I thought she was after rabbits, and I could see her running through the gorse bushes. Then I saw a black animal come out of the top of the gorse and into the thin strip of hawthorns. And it was, I would say, February, March at the time. There was no leaves in the trees. There was no vegetation, high grass or anything like that. And I had a clear view. It was an early morning, I'd say 10 o'clock in the morning with the blue sky. As I watched, I thought, it was initially a black Labrador. I could see my dog. I could see it. I could see the difference in size, and it was a lot bigger than my dog. I remember thinking, I wonder why it's moving away from my dog. Any other dog would have been excited by the racket my dog was making, and I would have expected another dog to try and join in or have its attention focused on my dog and the noise it was making. But I realised that it was a black cat. Honestly, the hair stood up in the back of my neck. It was just one of these moments. I've never experienced anything like it. It's gone up again, the back of my neck, thinking about it. But it just stealthily moved the 30 metres or so through the hawthorns and into the wood, and I lost it from sight. It was moving like a cat. It didn't want to be seen. It was keeping low, and it was almost gliding through the hawthorns very slowly and very assuredly. It must have been, in my view, for about 5 to 10 seconds. I had a real good view of it. And as I said, I could see my dog, I could see it, and I could see the difference in size. I could see this was jet black. I could see my dog was black and tan. So I'm convinced it was a black, in my view, leopard. It wasn't as stocky as, say, a jaguar. I've seen jaguars in the zoos, and it wasn't as stocky as a jaguar. It was lighter in build. It didn't look at me. It didn't look back at the dog. It just sort of glided off like a cat along through the hawthorns and then into this like mature woodland. And that was it. It was gone. So obviously I was screaming at my dog to get it back because I was frightened if she did catch up with it, that would be the end of her. So it didn't even look at me when I was doing that. It just moved away. It just wanted to be away from me and the dog and the noise.
What was your dog's perspective on it all, do you think?
I don't think she even saw it. Well, she didn't see it. It had just obviously been in the bushes, and it just slinked out the top of the bushes. When she'd gone in, it just got away from her. She didn't see it. I don't know if she was smelling it or she was smelling rabbits or what, but I was worried, and as I say, I shouted her back, and she came straight back.
Had she clocked it? Had she been fully aware of what it was? Is she the type of dog who would have retreated to you, or do you think she might have got excited and chased it and not realised the risk or what it was potentially?
I think she'd have gone after it. That's just the sort of dog she was. She would have done. But I don't think she would know what it was. Obviously, smells are different, but she'd never experienced a large cat before like that, and I don't think she'd have known what it was, but she might have smelled something and got excited about it.
Were you surprised that it wanted to melt away? Was there any part of you that thought, why isn't it actually treating my dog as prey?
No, there was nothing like that. It just didn't even look. That was the thing that struck me. My dog was making so much racket, and it just went away from the area my dog was in. And it was just clear as day. It didn't look at me. I was shouting for my dog. It didn't even turn around. It just went on its way, and it got out of the area.
It just didn't want any part of the commotion. It just wanted to flee.
Yeah. But it didn't run. It had been something like a fox. I've seen foxes, they leg it, but this was just under control. It wasn't frightened. It just got away as well as it could without being seen.
What do you reckon it was doing? Do you think it was resting up, laying up in the scrub, and not sort of looking in an ambush situation for any passing deer or rabbits, or is it impossible to know?
I don't know. But there are rabbits. There are always rabbits and burrows of rabbits in among the gorse bushes. So, there'd be a ready food source for a big cat there. And obviously I've seen deer in the area as well, but where the gorse bushes are, it's mainly rabbits.
Regular question for everybody. Compared to a average sort of black Labrador dog, what sort of scale?
I would say very similar. You get some very big black Labradors, and I don't think it was as big as one of them.
What about standout features? What do you remember most about it?
I didn't see the tail. Well, I can't remember seeing the tail. That's the only thing that gets me. But I don't know if it was because it was keeping low and it might have been masked by some dead grasses that were in the area, But I really can't remember seeing a big, curvy black tail.
And in terms of the blackness of the coat, was it just jet black and that was it, or was there anything else to it?
All I could see was jet black. That was it.
What about its muscularity and fitness and health, would you say?
It looked healthy, and I would say it was so under control, and it just melted away. It was in good health, I would say. And it wasn't chunky. I wouldn't say it was a chunky sort of big leopard, but in my view, it was I would say a female leopard. I've seen female leopards on the telly, and I would say it'd be that sort of build.
So you say the movement, you're saying it glided, it had that fluid gliding movement?
Well, it didn't run, it didn't bounce, it was very measured, it's slow, but just slow, and it sort of slinked away like a cat,
So this was a complete and utter surprise to you, presumably, because you didn't know of any history and background to that area having big black cat sightings, presumably.
Not at all. And to be honest, it stopped me going out in the woods at night. Frightened me. I was quite concerned about it, yeah.
Personally, or for the dog's perspective, or for both of you?
Personally, yeah. It was a big shock.
Was it an area of regular dog walking, or was it your known little patch that you took your dog to and it wasn't very busy, or was it an area where there would be dog walkers through the day at times?
Yes, there'd be quite a few dogs around during the day, and I used to get up there quite a bit. It was on my regular walk with the dogs.
Did you feel you needed to mention it to other people because you were worried about your own safety? Did you feel it was something that you wanted to mention to other people if you got a chance, or did you keep it quiet?
Well, obviously I mentioned it to the family, and I went into work, and I worked on a traffic car at the time over in Seaham. I went in and I told my opposite crew what I'd seen, and the male officer turned around and he says, well, Jenny's seen one as well. Jenny was a policewoman that worked on the opposite car to me, and she said she'd seen one in Hawthorne Dean prior to my sighting, and she'd been walking in a place, well, as I say, Hawthorne Dean, over near the coast. She was taking a Labrador for a walk with her mother, and she'd seen two deer burst out of woodland in front of her, followed very quickly by a big black cat. I remember her saying that the cat was catching up. It was that quick, it was catching up with the deer, and they went out of sight, and I think that frightened the living daylights out of her and her mother. So when I mentioned at work, she'd seen it as well. My kids were at junior school at the time. I spoke to one of the teachers, and she'd had two sightings in a place along the riverbanks, just on the outskirts of Durham City, in a place called Shincliffe Woods. She'd seen a black cat twice in there, one of them very close up when she parked in a secluded parking bay, and that had frightened her. She said to me it was sitting looking at it. It was only about 20 yards away, if I remember correctly. So, as I say, kids' teacher had a couple of sightings as well.
And you wouldn't have known about these other than you bringing it up in conversation. You'd have never been told those otherwise.
No, it was something that I would talk to people about.
Previously, you'd only heard about tan-coloured mountain lion puma type ones, and here we are, you saw a black one, and your professional colleague's one was black, was it, in Hawthorne Dean?
Yes, it was black as well.
We ought to say for listeners that Dean is a sort of northeast term for a sort of very deep gully valley. That's right, isn't it, Andrew?
Yes. It's usually got trees and gorse bushes and the likes in.
And they often run down to rivers or to the coast, and they are incredibly deep and tight, aren't they, many of them?
Yeah, I don't know specific area, but it's quite a swathe of land that runs down to the coast near Seaham Harbour.
Was it consoling, was it helpful validation for you to have these other reports you suddenly knew about? Ease your mind a bit that you weren't the odd one out?
Of course, yeah, because something happens and you think, did I really see that? Did I really see that? You start doubting yourself. And then when you hear other people who I've got plenty of time for and I think enough of, and they've seen something very, very similar, you know?
So your colleagues, with two of you seeing big black ones in a relatively similar area, they were believing you, presumably.
Yeah.
Which, of course, isn't always the case, both in police forces and elsewhere. So there's no teasing or ridicule or messing you about on it.
There was a bit of teasing from people, but I had enough respect from people that they would believe what I said, you know, and what I'd seen. I was detailed after that to a couple of jobs where a big black cat had been seen. One job I was on the armed response vehicle, and we got sent to a farm at a place called Witten Gilbert, which is on the other side of Durham. It's probably about 10 miles away from where I had my sighting. And basically a couple of kids had run into the local farm and been shouting at the farmer to get his gun as they'd been stalked by a large black cat. So they'd run in terrified, and we were sent up, obviously being firearms, and one of the pandas had gone to the farm and spoken to the kids and the farmer. We were on standby and we weren't used. I didn't even speak to the witnesses, but, you know, a couple of kids had run to the farm and they'd been fearful for their lives. So that'll be on a log somewhere in Durham Police. It'll be on the log somewhere. The farmer had phoned up, and so obviously he must have believed them. We just were sent up a standby just in case we were needed in our firearms capacity.
If you had to dispatch a large animal during your shift, would you have been trained and have the right calibre to do that, incidentally, and in terms of a matter of detail?
The weapons we had on the car, I don't think would have been of a sufficient calibre to deal with a large black cat like a leopard, in my view. We had .223 calibre weapons and .223 of an inch. It's not a very big round. To be honest, I think you would need something larger for a large cat, a big cat. But it's better than nothing.
I gather that many constabularies, if they ever needed somebody involved in a dangerous animal case, they will get in a specialist who has got experience in darting or dispatching large animals. And of course, they're rarely needed, luckily, by the police officer, but occasionally that might happen. And of course, as you know, unless an animal like that is cornered physically and actually can't evade the situation, the chances of you A, catching up with it, and B, getting a safe shot are absolutely minimal.
Yeah, I would say that, yes. Yeah. I was single crewed on a traffic car. I was sent to Sherburn Village, which is very near where I'd seen my cat. It's probably 3/4 of a mile away from where I'd had my sighting. Basically, I think a man in his house, if I remember correctly, had looked out, and there's a village called Belmont and a village called Sherburn Village. And in between that, you've got a beck or stream, and it's got trees up it, obviously arable fields on either side. And a householder had seen a large black cat in the trees in that area, and he'd phoned us. There was local police had got there before me, and basically the lad was taking the mickey out of him. This lad was, I have seen a big black cat, and he was, oh, yeah. So I walked in, And I shut him up. I says, well, it's about 3/4 of a mile away from where I've seen a big black cat as well, 6 months ago, whenever it was. So I shut him up anyway, and I spoke to this man, and it'd been a brief sighting, and it had vanished into the trees. But as I say, it was only a short distance from where I'd seen mine. It was a black cat as well. It frightened him. He'd seen it it was like a bit of a valley with a stream running through, and there were trees along the side of the stream. He'd seen it down there. He'd taken time to phone in. He was obviously frightened about it and concerned. I wasn't on the firearms car at the time. I was just on a normal traffic patrol car. I wasn't actually detailed it, but I heard it come over the radio, and because of what I'd seen, I attended.
He would have found that pretty supportive that you could back him up, that you'd seen one there as well.
Oh, yeah. Another strange thing I found once, which was after my sighting, I don't know which year it was, but we'd had snow. The snow had melted. It had gone to slush and then frozen up. I would say literally 400 yards from my sighting, there's another wood, and it's quite an extensive wood. And at the side of the wood, in an arable field, it was obviously winter wheat had been in the field. It was ice. It was, I would say, clear ice, but there was a big oval of fur, 2 meters by 1 meter, width 2 meters long. And it looked about the size, I would say, of a deer had been lying there. And in my view, it was deer winter coat. I know what winter coats are like on deer, the colour of it. And I know what a summer coat's like. And this was, in my view, the grey-brown winter coat of deer. But it looked like it had been stripped off from a carcass. There were no footprints I could see because the snow had melted and turned to ice. And there was no carcass anywhere. So whatever had plucked all this fur off what I presume is a deer, it obviously removed the carcass. That was a bit of a fright, and it was 400 yards from where I'd had my sighting.
By this time, then, were you on alert and looking out for tracks and signs and reports of big cats? Had it sort of got to you as an interest, or were these still sort of random chance events?
Well, random, but I've always had a very, very keen interest in wildlife. That's my big interest in life, birds and animals and wildlife. And I'm always on the lookout. I noticed things. I found some little handprints, looked like little handprints in the mud of the local beck. And I thought, Christ, is that an otter or not? Are they otter prints? And then a raccoon was videoed in my village. If you Google it, it's a Durham raccoon, taking nuts out of a nut feeder. There's all sorts of things kicking about. When I left the police, I joined the ambulance service and I did another driving course. And the instructor had a raccoon captured by the RSPCA in his garden in Sunderland. So, there's all sorts out there. I think you've just got to be open-minded.
Yeah, dumped or escaped. And of course, raccoons, raccoons do get out. They might look cute, but they're not to be messed with.
I'm sure, yeah. I moved house. Since I retired, I've moved house, and I live in a place called Spennymoor now. And 2.5 years ago, I went down the back wood with my dogs, and I found a half-eaten deer carcass in the wood. All its back end had been eaten out. I don't know if I sent you the photograph.
No, don't think you did.
I've got the photograph of it.
Oh, we can put that on the website then, if we may.
Yeah. I'll send it to you after this. Yeah. All it's in it and its back legs had been eaten, and there were 2, I would say, fang marks on its neck. In my view, if a dog would have made more of a mess of this deer's throat than what I could actually see. I came back the next day, and the rest of the carcass had just totally disappeared. And I don't think anything like a fox would be able to sort of just cart it off.
Was this a complete surprise because there's no history of big cat sightings in that location as far as you know?
Well, as far as I know, I'm new here, and as I said, it was 2.5 years ago, but there's a deer park half a mile away from where I found this. This was a roe deer. In the deer park, you've got the fallow deer that get out now and again, but definitely a roe deer and half-eaten.
You had those sightings, those incidents, way back, and yet we're not making a lot more progress. We've got a bit of DNA and there's bits of better footage these days. And of course, in those days, people didn't have smartphone cameras so much on their phones, did they, easily? Are you surprised we haven't made a bit more progress in uncovering more evidence over these years?
Well, you don't really know about if a gamekeeper had shot one, would he tell anybody? You've got to look at things like that. I would say if people had shot one, they're not going to brag about it because they might get in bother. That's my view.
Well, I think you're right. The best evidence gets hidden and sneaked away and kept private. And just on the shooting, I mean, my hunch is that, say, 2% of the population gets shot every year, or maximum 5% of the population gets shot. Well, I actually think that's not going to make much of an impact whatsoever on the overall population, to be honest. And I'm sure it wouldn't be more than that because it's so difficult to do and not many people are trying it anyway, to be honest. And in terms of your thoughts on big cats in the ecosystem and big cats as part of the makeup of wildlife now in Britain, what's your view on that?
I haven't heard of any harm to humans. If they're preying on deer and rabbits, what's the harm? And the one I saw, in my view, was trying to get away from where I was and where my dog was. And it didn't actively try and hunt me or hunt my dog. I know quite a few farmers, and none of them seem to have mentioned to me that they've lost sheep or whatever through predation from a cat. I don't know if they just go for the easy option. A couple of rabbits a day might keep them going.
Just your role in the police and the fact that you attended a couple of incidents where there had been reports of big cats and you saw one yourself. It's always interesting to think what people are expecting the police to do other than just take note of the fact that somebody, a member of the public, has seen a cat. But what do you think realistically a police role can be in big cat sightings and big cats in Britain?
Well, I think initially if they just go to a detail where someone's seen a cat, they'll just radio it in and it'll go on the log. But I know now I think police forces are using things like drones and stuff like that. So I don't know if that would be a better tool to try and find what we've got lurking in our landscape. But apart from that, the police, I don't think would be concerned whatsoever if there were big cats around, as long as they weren't harming anybody. That's my attitude. I don't think they'd put themselves out to try and have a line of police officers go through a wood and try and chase out a cat if it hadn't done anything.
Yeah, and of course the helicopters, I mean, the police certainly in the past, there's been known cases of different police forces scrambling a helicopter out to do a search after a reported big cat. But, I mean, you being, a wildlife buff yourself, you'd know that helicopters are a bit of a sort of intrusive vibration and noise on wildlife. It's almost like it's not the right tool for the job, is it, in my view, to go looking for wildlife in a helicopter. You're just going to scare it off and make it go to ground. You may have a heat-seeking camera in it, but your chances of finding much, I think, are limited. Whereas a drone, of course, I mean, these days I presume the police are more likely to use a drone because it's cheaper and less intrusive on wildlife.
I'm led to believe forces have got drones. It's all happened since I retired. But you say about helicopters, something like a cat, which is very elusive, is just going to go into some thick vegetation. And I don't think even a thermal imaging camera would pick it up, in my view. So it's pointless with helicopters unless it's open, arable land, isn't it?
You're reminding me now, actually, that I was speaking to an ex-police officer from Durham Constabulary a couple of years ago about his interest in big cats, Eddie Bell. He was telling me this wasn't to do with big cats. He was talking about helicopters and thermal cameras, and he said, to give you an idea of how difficult it is and what a mess you can get into sometimes, he was out with a colleague and they were trying to catch up with a couple of people who were evading, some crime scene, and this helicopter was telling them to go down this old track or something, and they'd got something by a tree, and they were sort of directing Eddie and his colleague to it. And they said, yeah, you're there, go at 10 metres left and then straight on. And Eddie was following the directions from the helicopter pilot, looking at the camera. And he said, yeah, you're right there. You must be able to touch the suspect. And so go ahead and take action, please. And he said, no, nobody around whatsoever. And they kept on saying, you're right there, just... And he said, after a couple of minutes, scratching their heads and thinking, what on earth is going on? He looked up in the tree and there was a heron nesting in the tree. And the camera had got the heron, but not known that wasn't on the ground. And Eddie and his colleagues had just been wasting time, not spotting the heron. And the criminals, I think, had another 5 minutes sort of march on them. And I had a good chat with Eddie about big cats, and you may have known him.
Yeah, I know Eddie, yeah.
He told me that he used to look after animals because I think he had a small holding and had some animals. He once had to look after a lynx that was taken in before it was passed on somewhere. And there was a female. She was there with him for a few months and she came into heat. And he saw another lynx on the outskirts of his property and he assumed that was responding to her calling and being an estrus.
Yeah, further to that, he told me, I think he had a pair of lynx. If I remember correctly, he had a pair of lynx. He had them in a compound. And when it came into heat, season whatever, the two male lynxes were going hammering tongues at each other with a fence between them.
Okay.
So there was a wild lynx and there was his own lynx.
Great. Well, Andrew, thanks very much for time. Thank you for helping us sort of open up the new year for Big Cat reporting on the podcast. So great to hear from you. Look forward to seeing the photo. Good luck with your dog walking. Let's hope you turn up some more interesting wildlife.
The wood behind me is filled with deer. I've seen 5 tonight when I was out with the dogs. There's plenty around for something like a leopard to eat. Grey squirrels, deer, loads of food out there if needed.
Very good, yeah. And predators are not going to go hungry in our woods in Britain.
No.
Good stuff. Thanks ever so much, Andrew. Take care. Great to speak to you. Thanks ever so much for coming on Big Cat Conversations.
Okay, thanks, Rick.
For our next guest, we welcome Nick, and he's from Kent in southeast England. And he's another former police officer, and he will be talking about 5 different incidents, including his own sighting that occurred in Kent during his police career there. And they started with that incident of his sighting in 1994. Happy New Year, Nick, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Rick, and Happy New Year to yourself. And yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share my experience and the sightings of others that they recounted to me.
Great, look forward to it. And we actually had an ex-police officer, Rod, back in episode 47, and he was also in southeast part of Kent. His sighting was in his beat, which at the time was probably 20 miles south of you, and that was perhaps 8 years before yours, 1986. So that actually brings me on to our first point, which is before you had this string of incidents, including your sighting, had you heard anything about potential big cat sightings in England at all, either through the police network or as a sort of citizen, just hearing about it in the news and that sort of thing?
Before my own sighting and the accounts of others that I'll be talking about, I suppose all I can really remember is hearing of the beast of Bodmin, really. I think that was the one that everyone knew. Everyone had heard there were big cats out there due to beast of Bodmin type stories, but nothing recounted to me by anyone I know until the events I'm going to talk about today.
Okay, so you didn't know that it could be a thing in Kent?
No, because of course, you hear the beast of Bodmin stories and you think, well, probably tall tales.
Would you have called yourself a sceptic, or were you open-minded, or had you not given it much thought?
I don't recall giving it much thought at all. I would say sceptic is probably a good description. The first incident predates my first encounter. It was around 1991 when a friend of mine, we actually met through I was a special constable before I joined the regular force. And he was also a special constable. But he was also a keeper at a wildlife park in Kent, which I prefer not to name. but there are several in Kent, so there's plenty for people to choose from. But he told me that he wasn't a keeper of the cats, the big cats, but he told me that the smaller big cats would regularly escape from their cages. But I remember his words, most of the time, they would be able to coax them back with food. He said that when this occurred, it was never reported officially to the police or the media. It was just dealt with in-house. He described them as smaller big cats, so I'm guessing things like ocelots, things like that, I suppose he's talking about. That occurred in 1991, but that only came back to me really as being significant after my own sighting, which then occurred in about 1994. Yeah, summer 94.
What's intriguing about what he said is regularly. I guess it may be what he meant by regularly, because I find it difficult to think that regularly was a routine thing. Maybe it happened a few times over many years, perhaps.
Yes.
Any zoo or wildlife park would take action, once it's happened once and be on guard for it. Sometimes these cats will come back for food regardless. They don't even need to be coaxed. They'll just think it's 5 o'clock the next day, and 5 o'clock they're sort of hardwired to expect, delivery of food in their enclosure. So they go there ready, just like people's domestic cats turn up ready at the allotted time because their body clock's working. I know we're going to come back to that sort of with one of your following incidents. So now we go on to 1994 in East Kent. Your first and only personal sighting, yeah?
Yeah, I've been in the police for about a year now. I was on night duty, and this is in the Canterbury area. So I was a Canterbury response officer, and I'd been given the rural car for the night, designation 28. And I was single crewed, and it was summer, and I remember it was absolutely gorgeous summer morning. So we're talking about, 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. It's already sunny, warm, beautiful morning. And I was driving down a country lane just off of the A2, quite close to the villages of Bridge, Patricksbourne kind of area, and probably a couple of 100 yards from the A2 road. And I was very slowly driving down, just really, killing time till I can go in, tidy up paperwork and hand over to early turn. And in the lane in front of me, about 25 to 30 yards in front of the police car, big black cat broke cover from the hedge on the east side of the lane. It crossed the lane in front of my car, and it got so far across the lane and saw me, and it froze initially, and then it turned on its tail and shot back into the hedge where it had just come from. I would estimate it as the size of a large Labrador German Shepherd, and it was completely black, and it was definitely a cat. No doubt it was a cat. It was beautiful, sunny morning, perfect light, 25, 30 yards away, and I probably had it in view for 8 to 10 seconds. So the next thing I did was I put my foot down, and I shot along to the point where it had disappeared into the hedge. Bearing in mind, you've got to remember, I'm a young response cop. All I see is red mist, if you understand the term. You're always ready for a fight. So I jump out my car, I pull out my truncheon, because we still got wooden truncheons back in 94, and I just ran through the hedge, abandoned my car in the lane, ran through the hedge, and on the other side there was a narrow copse of trees. Got to the other side of that, and it was a field of crop, whether it was wheat, rye, barley, but it was quite high, still green, and I just stopped because it was just the crop. Couldn't see anything else, and the only sound was just the crop gently moving with the light breeze. While I'm standing there looking around, it suddenly dawned on me the stupidity of what I'd just done. And it was just pure adrenaline. But as I was coming down, it kind of dawned on me that no, this isn't smart. So I kept my truncheon up and I gradually retraced my steps walking backwards until I felt safe enough to turn round and bolt back to the car. And I jumped in the car and closed the door. I was just sitting there, just thinking about what I'd just seen. And a car drove by. The guy stopped alongside me, and it turned out he was a gamekeeper for the local farms, the shoots. And so I told him what I'd just seen, and he was not at all surprised. And his response was, "I don't want one of those round here eating my pheasants." He wasn't surprised. He didn't say, "Oh, no, obviously you saw something else." He accepted what I said. Interestingly, just up the road from where I saw this, there is a wildlife park. But I went back to the station and I told everyone. And you can imagine what the coppers were like. They just ribbed me non-stop. But my inspector, he took me seriously, and he set about contacting the local wildlife parks, because as I say, there are quite a few in the South Kent area, but none of them said they'd lost a big cat. And yeah, that's what happened back in '94. And after that, I was a believer.
Your inspector, do you think he'd had previous experience and that's why he was accepting, or do you think he just felt you were a credible guy and you don't missight something from the front of your car at that distance? Why do you think he was more accepting than your other colleagues?
I don't know if he had any previous experience. If he did, he didn't mention it. He was just a very level-headed, serious old inspector. I think he probably weighed up all the factors, and he probably decided, yeah, this guy, I think he knows what he's talking about, because I'd already got a bit of a reputation for being a thief taker, and I had the highest arrest rate on the area. So I think he thought, yeah, well, this guy, when he sees something, he knows what he's seeing. So I think he just put his faith in me.
Also, it's quite an admission, isn't it? I think if you're going to be on the record professionally as saying, I've seen something that unusual, because it could be that some people would not take the risk professionally of admitting something unusual, but you did, and he probably felt good on you. You know, I respect that, basically, with your detail of it. So maybe it was that as well.
I think so.
Of course, in those days, policemen didn't have body cameras, and their cars didn't have dash cams. These days, do you think it would have been recorded on the police car dash cam?
It would have been amazing if I had that back then, and it did, because then there'd have been no question. If I'd have been driving faster, there would have been evidence, because I'd have ran straight into it. Thankfully, I didn't. I wouldn't want to hurt the thing.
Say you had footage from the dash cam. I wonder what the police would have done with it. My hunch is it wouldn't have done the rounds publicly. It would have been kept in police records because it's sensitive stuff and a bit awkward to release. What do you reckon?
Oh, yeah, I've no doubt I'd have been told this never happened. Don't talk about it.
I think it is just thoroughly awkward because you're then holding the explosive, aren't you, and getting lots of questions that are difficult to answer, and you suddenly own the subject just by that chance event. So it is tricky. We must talk about the truncheon because earlier today you and I were agonising over what we should use for word of the week, some police term on big cats. And we thought, let's just go to something which is relevant to the incident itself, and that's the truncheon, which is hilarious, really, because, as you say, you instinctively had it as your comfort blanket and your... Well, how often generally would you actually use the truncheon? Presumably you didn't often use the truncheon physically.
In all the years I carried the wooden truncheon before we got the expandable batons, I remember using it twice, once to break a car window for a rescue, and then the second time was on two burglars who I came across over in, I think it was either Whitstable or Herne Bay, and they wanted a fight, so truncheon came out.
Do you have to be careful in that situation how you use it? Because it could be absolutely brutal, couldn't it, if you used it without care?
Well, in training, you're taught strike areas for different circumstances. The strike areas that escalate as the danger escalates. Generally, it's arms and legs.
And in that situation, it worked for you, did it?
Oh, yeah.
Few, okay. In fact, as we're talking about police incidents, you are, in fact, the 8th police officer guest on the podcast, and that's by far and away the highest sort of representation amongst any professions on the podcast.
I'd have thought there's a lot more than 8 cops who've had the sightings. They probably just don't want to come forward.
Or we haven't found them yet, or they're not retired yet and they will do once they're retired, that sort of thing. Because, yes, I am in touch with some who have had reports and are interested and keep in touch informally. And it may be that they will help the subject out and offer their services once they're retired.
Similar thing with cops who see UFOs, that they'll talk about it to close colleagues, but they won't talk about it publicly.
I'm sure, plus anything else a bit out of the ordinary.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
On to the actual cat itself, could you describe any other standout features? You talked about its scale and its colour. Well, first of all, on the colour, was it jet black and nothing else, or was there any texture or tone or anything?
If there was texture, I couldn't make it out. I would describe it as sleek black because in the recollection I have, it was already a sunny morning, even at that time. It was a beautiful morning. The blackness looks sleek, if you see what I mean. This thing was just totally black, totally black.
How were you labelling it, personally?
Black Panther, that's what I thought. Didn't look any deeper than that into anything else it could be. Since those days, I've heard the term melanistic leopard, but I'd never heard that back then. It was just Black Panther.
In terms of its health and fitness and confidence and wildness, how would you describe that?
There was nothing about it that made me think this is a scrawny, sick cat. This was a proper big cat. If you saw footage of a Black Panther or a big cat out in the wild, that's what this was. It had the bulk, the physical presence, and the way it moved just came down onto the lane. And when it froze for that 2 seconds, but when it turned, wow, did that move fast. It was just gone. But I saw the tail whip round as it turned. That confirmed to me. I mean, I could see it was a big cat, but seeing the tail as well, no doubt at all.
What do you reckon it was doing? Do you reckon it was just moving from A to B, or did it look in stalking mode? And also, how come it didn't hear the car if you were so close to it?
I was literally crawling down that road.
So not making a lot of noise in the car?
No, it's a little Peugeot 309 diesel. I know that because that's what we used to drive as basic response officer. That was in the days before police driving courses. There's a car, turn your blue lights on, off you go. It was far less professional, the driving standards back then. So we had little Peugeot 309 diesels, and we had a thing, if you wanted to just drive along quietly, you just put it into second gear, take your feet off the pedals, and the car basically takes itself along at a crawl. And that's how you drive around at night as well, if you were checking out the back streets looking for people up to no good. You just put it into second and the car would drive itself, and that's when it was its quietest. And that's all I was doing, driving down this country lane, just about to go back in to hand over to early turn. And so I guess it didn't hear me, didn't hear the car. It just came out, crossed the road. I don't recall it looking like it was stalking. It was just like crossing the road.
Emotionally, at that moment, what did it feel like having that close-up sighting? Starting from scratch, not even knowing there could be one in Kent. How did that feel?
I was a bit of an adrenaline junkie back then, and I was always up for the chase. So straight away I got the adrenaline rush, and that's why I ran after the thing. But common sense soon took over. But yeah, I was just, well, I suppose amazed I'd seen it, I guess, and excited, wow, there's big cats out there. There really are. What I hadn't mentioned was I called it in on the radio. So back then it was local control rooms. So now there's a central police control room. But back then it was local. So we had our Canterbury control room, and I called it in over the radio. So that's how everyone knew. Of course, when I got back, totally ribbed. it wasn't taken that seriously at that point. But as I say, when I got back, then when I spoke to the inspector, came to find me and we spoke about it, and then he started making his calls. But there was no armed response. That didn't happen. No.
Good stuff. Well, thank you for that one. So we then move on to a colleague of yours who saw one. Did he admit it to you because he knew that you'd seen one?
Yeah, it was. I seem to recall it was just soon afterwards, within whether it was weeks or months. But he told me because he knew about my sighting, and we were on the same team. He lived in the village of Orcombe, in the Orcombe Valley. If I've got it right, about 9 miles from where I had my sighting, just off the A2 near Bridge. He was out walking his dog. He was with his daughter, apparently, he told me. And they were walking in one of the lanes that runs off of Orcombe Village, which is a tiny village. And he said as they were walking up the lane, a big cat, crossed the lane in front of them, paid them no attention, crossed the lane from one side of the lane to the other and disappeared into the trees. And he described it as the size of a dog. I don't recall any discussion about what type of dog, exactly how big. But yeah, that also happened in 94.
So geographically fairly close and the same year?
Yes, yeah.
So, doesn't necessarily mean it was the same one, but did you both at the time assume that it was most likely to be the same one?
We did. I think it was largely because, it's only about 9 miles down the road, and how many black panthers are out there, So we kind of assumed it was the same cat. I do remember him, though, as laid back as he was kind of quite shocked by it. But I don't recall him telling me about any follow-up that he did. And I don't know if he reported it officially, but he spoke to me personally because of the sighting I'd had quite recently.
To you, was that a nice bit of validation?
Oh, yeah, it was great. It was great. See, the thing with cops, if there's an opportunity to rib a colleague, they'll do it, whether or not they believe you. So it could be that quite a few of them believe me, but it was an opportunity to make fun. That's the way it goes.
You won't have heard it yet, but listeners will have heard it by now. The previous guest, Andrew in County Durham, I was asking him this point, expecting him to say that he got teased about big cat sightings, but he said it wasn't in his circles, his immediate circles in the County Durham constabulary at the time. It was taken seriously. And I actually think it does depend on the sort of knowledge and information base and experience of the different officers and staff members in the force at the time, because I think sometimes a member of the public can call in a report and it will be taken seriously, and sometimes it will not necessarily be taken that seriously, all depending on the experience of the people who are receiving that information.
Hit the nail on the head there, Rick, because I don't know what the experience length of service of your previous interviewee was, but I was in my first year of policing. And so I was one of the, what was called back then, probationers on the team. So, of course, I was always up for a ribbing. I'm sure if it was one of the long-established team members, the long-in-service cops, then I'm sure that the ribbing would have probably been non-existent and taken far more seriously by the colleagues.
You were a target for being put down.
Oh, yeah. That's the way it goes. Till the next probation comes along, then it's their turn. It's character building.
Good stuff, yeah. So, we're not finished yet.
No, we are not.
Is the next incident you were talking to one of your friends who was in a shooting syndicate?
Yes. So this was when I transferred to working at the border, so border control policing. And one of the security contractors at the security guards at the port, he later became a special constable. But he was at the time, he was working for a security company. And he was an older guy. He was, had his head screwed on, very sensible. But he was, like me, he was into shooting, so we would talk about shooting. And this was around 2003 that we had this discussion. that he was a member of a pheasant shooting syndicate, or he was a beater for a pheasant shooting syndicate. I can't remember which. What they would do at the beginning of a shooting season and at the end of a shooting season, they will have what they call pest shoots. He said this was at the beginning of the shooting season. They had the pheasant feeders in the wood. They try and take out as many pests, what they call pests, as they can, that will either eat the pheasant poults, the young pheasants, or the pheasant food. And so some of the guys will walk through the wood, beating and making a noise, and then other guys will stand on the other side of the wood, on the edge of the field, with their shotguns, facing away from the wood for safety. And then they'll all be in camouflage, as the beaters drive the pests out of the wood, they will then shoot them. That's the way it works. And so he's standing there, he's one of the guns. And what he believes is a fox breaks cover from the wood. So he swings through it, shoots with his shotgun, kills the fox. But it's not a fox. He told me, and this is his words, he said it was a lynx. Now, when it comes to small, big cats, you show me a tiger or a lion, I can tell you a leopard, I'll tell you cheetah, I know what they are. But when it comes to the smaller, big cats, lynx, bobcat, serval, all these kind of things, I couldn't tell them apart. But he said it was a lynx. He said that they contacted the closest wildlife park again. This is in South Kent, that kind of area where I spoke to him, but where his shoot was, I don't know. All I know is it's somewhere in Kent. He didn't clarify. So somewhere in Kent, they contacted the closest wildlife park to the shoot, which was the same park where 12 years earlier, my old special constabulary colleague told me that small big cats regularly escaped. So there's the tie-in. Now, he said the park confirmed it was their cat and they were furious. But, of course, they couldn't do anything about it.
We now know, years on, that lynx are seen. It is a thing. And it could have been at that time there was more than one lynx in southeast Kent or wherever this was in Kent out and about. So how would they have known it was precisely that? Did they make the assumption or did they actually see the body?
I didn't go into the detail with him. I can only assume they had lost one and one turns up dead.
Do you know if they were provided with a body or a photograph of it or something?
I don't know. He was a very trustworthy, sensible guy. I'm sure he joined the police in some capacity. I had no reason to doubt him. Why would he say that if it wasn't true?
It's a lot of detail to go into, isn't it? And
yeah.
It does sound credible. I mean, you said they're there to shoot pests when they're flushed out of woodlands. The most likely target and the most frequent target is going to be a fox, isn't it, when they do that?
Yes. Yeah, they're primarily... I've never been involved in that kind of shooting, but primarily, yes, they're after foxes.
And he's going to naturally assume that anything broadly that kind of colour tone and that rough size is a fox. And so he's just instinctively trigger ready, primed to shoot, even though it was the wrong species. If people shoot something unusual, I mean, you'll know this if you are a shooter, if people shoot something unusual, they normally take a photo, don't they?
Yeah.
May well have been a photo at the time of that.
Mind you, if I would hate to shoot a big cat. If I did shoot one in error, can't imagine I would, but if I did, I wouldn't want to talk about it. But I'd feel terrible.
Maybe it's not something you celebrate with a photo.
No.
If you've got that view about it. Yeah. But
there's trophy hunters out there that will probably want to take it home, skin it, take the teeth, make a necklace, whatever. I don't know. I'm not one of those people. I do a lot of shooting at night and I use night vision. I use digital scope, which has a recording capability and a camera capability. And it would be amazing to see a big cat and be able to film it through my scope. And then I would have the evidence.
Well, I don't know whether you've heard me say, I think I've mentioned it on the podcast, that we have in the last year known about a contact of one of our listeners who has been watching what he's very sure is a melanistic leopard when he's been out deer stalking. He's been asked if he would release the footage and he's declined. I think personal reasons, I don't think he feels he wants to sort of let the world share the view of this cat that he admires, and doesn't want to shoot and feels, it's fascinating to watch it stalking when he's out stalking. And I think also he'd be a bit reluctant in case it ever got out in terms of the location and the estate would then be known about.
Yeah.
It is happening. There's probably happened to other people. And again, the same thought process goes through those people. Why would they sort of want to release it and let it get all over Facebook and YouTube and TikTok and that sort of thing? It's a tricky one.
No, and I think for the right reasons. The safety of the cat, as far as I'm concerned, and clearly you too, the safety of the cat is paramount. The cat continuing to survive is more important than proving to people that it exists.
Some people don't even just convey a witness report. They don't even report their sighting because they feel they're going to compromise the animal they've seen.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, good stuff. So we finished the poor shot lynx situation. Nothing more to say on that, is there? And we can go on to the next one.
No, I think we've covered everything.
Was there something about a wild boar?
Yes. Now, this one will be probably quite widely known among the older shooting community in the South Kent area. I'll say his first name because unfortunately, we lost him to cancer a few years back, but Chris. Chris was very well known in shooting circles because he was one of the few people that shot wild boar across Kent and into Sussex.
For listeners, especially overseas listeners, there are feral wild boar in Britain, including Forest of Dean near me in Gloucestershire. In fact, Forest of Dean location is one of the key refuges now of the sort of escaped, gone feral wild boar. One of the initial locations was East Sussex and West Kent. So for many years, there was a small boar population in that area and presumably culled to some degree. And in fact, they are petering out there. There's not many these days, not many there at all now, if my information is correct.
That's the population that he was involved in culling. It was that area that you've just mentioned. What he told me, and I know many others, there's no reason why he would have lied about this. He said that one of the areas where he was shooting wild boar, he shot two, what he described as young wild boar. He strung them up by their legs over the bough of a tree to basically bleed them while he went off on the cull and carried on. And the way he described it, although they were young wild boar, they were a decent weight. When he came back, one of them had gone. He assumed someone had heard him shooting, come along and stolen one of the wild boar. So in this wood, in this area where he was shooting, he said there was also a pheasant shoot and they had feeders in the wood. And he went back about a week later and he saw one of the guys tending the feeders. Of course, word got around about this stolen boar that Chris was telling everyone about. And he said, "Oh, come with me. Got something to show you." So he took him down the wood a ways and said, "Now look up there." And over the bough of a tree was this partially eaten boar. And so Chris said, it was clearly a big cat.
Everybody would make that instant conclusion that it had been hoisted up the tree.
Yes.
Do you know if a photo was taken of that?
No. All I ever heard was Chris told me the story personally, and he told many others as well.
So eaten out as well?
He said partially eaten.
And of course, we don't know how many cases there are of hoisted carcasses. It's not widely reported. There are some, and of course, some could be hoaxes as well.
Yeah, I guess.
If it's well up a tree, then that's quite a thing to do, to hoax, and people might not even see it, so you might be hoaxing for no value. But there are some credible reports and photos of hoisted carcasses, and it would happen. These are leopards. They don't need to hoist their carcasses like they would do in their native countries because of the competition and the scavenging and hassle factor they get from other animals, but still could happen here. The sort of thing where photos would be so good to have because it's there to be photographed because it's a static thing. In all that time of him shooting culling boar, did he hear any more about big cats, do you know, through his networks?
That was the only time he ever mentioned big cat to me.
OK, well, that exhausts the series of incidents, and by that time you had now really acclimatised.
Totally.
How did it influence you as a sort of person and as a police officer?
I don't think as a police officer, but certainly as an individual, it's the knowledge they're there, and I would love to see them again. I'd love to see another one. I'd love to be able to film it. It'd just be amazing. It's not something I think, knowing they're there, I'm not afraid. I still go out in the countryside. No one gets attacked by them. They're just there. They've got plenty of food sources. I think it's just wonderful that they're out there, and I just hope they continue to be there. And if it becomes known where there is one, I just hate to think that the helicopters would swoop and armed police would shoot it, or gangs of men with guns would go out to try and take it out. Because I'm not aware. Yeah, we've all heard of the odd mutilated sheep or the missing lamb. I know 2 sheep farmers. Neither of them have lost a sheep or a lamb in the last 3 or 4 years that I've known them, because they tell me if they had. This is an area where we know we've got big cats. There are no deer to speak of, and yet 2 large sheep farms, they're not losing sheep.
They would lose sheep through natural causes.
Yeah, sheep are very delicate animals, and they tend to drop dead for no reason, and then, of course, the crows are on them.
And foxes will scavenge them, of course. The degree to which foxes can't tackle sheep has been very apparent to me, because I have open fields next to me here in Gloucestershire, and through November, December, we've been having a fox amble through the sheep field next to us, and it's just sort of meandering round the sheep, foaling, just like a cat does. My ex-stray cat that's moved in with us, it does the same, pouncing on mice and voles, and this fox is doing the same, and the sheep have got used to it, and it cannot tackle the sheep, and it knows not to bother.
Lambs are vulnerable in the first...
Of course.
Until they've got some strength, lambs are vulnerable. But then they're just as vulnerable to crows at that time.
Well, it's good that you have those contacts with the farmers, so you might know of anything. And of course, you doing your shooting, you've got your contacts with the shooting fraternity, and that's your key chance of actually seeing a big cat, isn't it? And filming one even.
I spend most of my time out shooting, wildlife watching. It's amazing when you're out at night. And badgers are fearless. So badgers will come up and you stand very still, because I've been attacked by a badger because I surprised it walking through long grass. They will come up, they make a snuffling noise around your feet, and they'll go sniff around you, and then when they've had enough of you, they'll be off. But it's amazing.
They've got very poor eyesight, haven't they? So they're not often that knowledgeable about what they're bumping into, potentially.
No. There's lots of beautiful wildlife out there. Badgers, owls. It's incredible.
Final point, then, we ask everybody this, and you've sort of strongly hinted your view, your attitude to big cats, living and surviving and seemingly naturalising in the wild in Britain. So you're positive about it, Nick?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's a good thing. Like the reintroduction, I think, up in Blean Woods, is it? Between Canterbury and Herne Bay, Canterbury and Whitstable, there's European bison being introduced.
Yeah.
Into the woods there. I think, are there beavers somewhere? I think it's all great.
East Kent's got some beavers in an enclosure, one of the first places to trial those.
Oh, wow, okay.
South of Sandwich a bit. Yeah, that was one of the first experiments. Anything finally that you wanted to say or emphasise, Nick, before we close out?
No, just thank you for the opportunity to share.
Great. Well, it's been fascinating and great to start the new year with 2 ex-police officers talking about their own experiences and what they've heard through the grapevine. Really good to hear from you, and nice to have another case from Kent. I think you're the 4th one we've had on the podcast from Kent. I hope we get more. Do keep in touch, Nick, and thanks ever so much for all your time and for coming on Big Cat Conversations.
My pleasure. Thank you, Rick.
Well, we now have an extra snippet for the end of the show because we need to mention the Lynx saga that's been playing out in Scotland in early January. I presume nearly everyone has seen the press coverage of this case involving 4 lynx released and then captured close to the Highland Wildlife Park. There were 2 back-to-back incidents of 2 lynx being captured each time, and unfortunately one of the lynx died when it had been recovered. So we have Paul Macdonald here to help discuss what's been happening and what the implications are for our specific angle on the subject. Paul is a regular guest on the show, as you will know, and he helps run Scottish Big Cat Research, which is a network of investigators in Scotland. Paul, thank you for joining us at short notice. I know it's been a crazy few days and you must have been busy as I have. Thanks for joining us as ever, Paul.
Yeah, you're welcome, Rick. It's good to be back.
Good stuff, thank you. And we're not going to be able to cover everything properly, I think, so we can come back to it on a future episode with you perhaps, and maybe there'll be more information coming to light by the time we cover it again. And you and I both been in the Scottish press today with a sort of angle of, well, there are cats reported in Scotland already, how ironic is this sort of thing. We'll come on to that in a minute. So, just a few snippets then to talk through. We're speaking just a week later now, but it all kicked off on the evening of 8th of January, didn't it?
Yeah, it was on the afternoon of January 8th, on Wednesday, there was a report put into Police Scotland of 2 lynx being sighted in the Kingussie area. Within about 12 hours, I think, Royal Zoological Society Scotland staff were deployed and managed to successfully capture the first 2 lynx. But then on Friday the 10th, early in the morning at 7:10, there was a Police Scotland report put into Police Scotland confirming another 2 lynx sighted. And again, they were captured by 6:30 p.m. on the Friday evening. Unfortunately, it was later reported one of those lynx captured had died by the morning of Saturday 11.
These were clearly very tame animals, but also straight out of captivity into temperatures of minus 15 degrees and coldest night in Scotland in that area for quite a while. Difficult start in life in the wild, isn't it, for them? So, that's going to have quite an impact, especially if you're totally bewildered, you're disorientated, you don't know how to kill deer, you've never killed rabbits for yourself. If you're left out there for a month in decent weather, you'd probably get the hang of some of that. But, midwinter low temperatures, not a good start to life in the wild, is it?
Yeah, there were clearly young lynx at that as well. And I think it's quite clear to join the dots and confirm that we've got a combination of very young lynx that are probably not far off, if any, surviving in a natal ranging area rather than establishing their own ranging area, which is what you would really want to do if you were actually rewilding. The evidence at the moment, I think, points towards this not being a deliberate rewilding event, an attempt to offload some youngsters near footfall and very conveniently near the Highland Wildlife Park where they could be swiftly recovered. So I think everything points towards these being abandoned, let's say, rather than released in that sense. I think that paints a more accurate picture as to what's actually happened.
Clearly there's been a lot of speculation these past few days, right from the start, about the motives, and the lead motive has been assumed to be somebody who was keen on rogue rewilding, rogue releasing of lynx, because they couldn't wait for the official consultation discussion to conclude and to make a point because they're impatient. And so it was assumed that this was somebody thumping the table saying, look, I'm going to do it anyway. They're out in the wild. That was the theory that many people had, and that some people thought that even some of the rewilding landowners might be turning a blind eye to it. But another theory is that it was somebody creating a stunt, causing a stunt to draw attention to the topic, and whether they were captured or not, it's still going to draw attention to the subject because they're going to be seen, they're going to be potentially captured, baited cages are going to go out, and that's going to draw a lot of commotion in the media. So whatever the outcome, it could have been a stunt. That was in fact my lead theory until I heard the Chinese whispers you've also heard about. This could have been somebody who actually was struggling to keep them, who knew that maybe abandoning them in that particular location would have a good chance of indirectly rehoming them with the Highland Wildlife Park. And it seems that's going to be the outcome. And it may well be that they're quite a draw and high-profile exhibits for the Highland Wildlife Park in the future, which in fact will be a fairly progressive outcome of the whole case, I think. But I think the lead theory, like you, is that this is somebody who's not necessarily a strong advocate of reintroducing lynx to Scotland, but is somebody who has other exotic animals, including these lynx, licensed or unlicensed, and they just thought, well, if I abandon them there, then that's a chance for them to be rehomed in an appropriate place.
Yeah. I think it's quite clear that they were also illicitly owned in the first place, which would be the obvious reason for covertly abandoning them in that sense, rather than approaching any authority or wildlife park directly.
Because also, if you were genuinely interested in introducing those 4 individuals into the wild in Scotland, you'd probably do it well away from any potential scrutiny, well away from the Highland Wildlife Park, and let them just melt away and do their own thing with no chance of being observed by people and baited cages going out from specialists who are based nearby.
We have been aware of a few incidents of intentional guerrilla rewilding events in Scotland of lynx, and in each case that seems to have been the case, done very covertly, and these events seem to have been successful. We do have subsequent activity and sightings of lynx around those areas, not far from where these events have been said to have taken place.
We're now left with what are the implications, because clearly there's been major media scrutiny of this, and the views on lynx reintroduction at either end are quite polarised. In relation to our subject, I think the strong advocates of lynx reintroduction tend to evade or ignore the fact that there are potential cats out there already, as reported. And people who are against it very firmly, again, tend to be unaware or just evade the fact that there are potentially cats out there already who are largely behaving themselves. So it's quite awkward to either side of the debate, isn't it?
What seems to have come out of this, though, is overall there's been clearly quite a mixed public reaction as to whether this is a good thing in the long term. If it's done officially and responsibly, is it a good thing in the long term or not? What we're actually seeing across Facebook groups and from opinion from following on from newspaper articles, many folks seem to be fully for lynx, and many saying if they're already out there, leave them alone, and seeing the benefits of them being back in our environment that way.
Bottom line is it does actually just create awareness of what the lynx is as a cat. And as a former British native cat, that achieves something. So I think there's always unintended implications and consequences of these events, aren't there? And I don't think we know fully how that's going to play out. But certainly the media are very hungry to cover this, aren't they? So they see it as, I think, as a real bundle of interesting issues and different sort of perspectives.
I've actually been quite impressed by the way in which the media's handled it in that sense. I haven't seen anything outside of fact-based reporting on these stories. There's thankfully not been scaremongering in that sense, with snarling faces and words like beast and monster being used. The public are getting the basic facts of the story, which is great, and the opinions are only being formed from that.
It's interesting that the strong advocates of lynx reintroduction are stating in the press that they feel it could well put the case back because politicians are unlikely to respond to irresponsible events. So do you think very short term it will put things back, but medium term we just don't know what the outcome will be about potential lynx reintroduction?
I would agree with that. This general perception that it's been a very irresponsible rewilding event has been the damage caused here. I think if we look at the facts and we look at the reality of it, it does not appear to have been a rewilding event.
Or a reintroduction event.
Yeah, it doesn't appear to have been that. So I think it can be taken as something, as an aside to the whole question of reintroduction and rewilding in that way.
The fact that you guys in the Scottish Big Cat Research Network have been busy mapping the sightings of all the candidate species, including lynx.
Yes, yeah.
And some of that's got into the press, and you're trying to create awareness raising on that. How do you see that getting tangled up with the debate and the politics of lynx reintroduction? It's potentially messy, isn't it? Are you trying to sidestep the sort of politics of lynx reintroduction?
As our team efforts, we will continue doing what we do in terms of intelligence gathering, mapping and so on. What we have done with our national mapping is we have distilled that into a lynx-centric map that's only the lynx sightings. And it's produced quite a fascinating picture, and it is one that absolutely suggests that they've been here, and they've been here for long enough. Our earliest sighting goes back to 1968, so even before the 1976 Dangerous Wild Animals Act, we have accounts of lynx already living wild in Scotland. So it's presenting this picture that's a challenging one for many to very strongly suggest that they're already here. That has the potential to change the question of rewilding as going from one of reintroduction to one of boosting a current population. And a native population, as lynx has always been a native animal. We don't feel as though we should be afraid of getting involved in that sense in promoting our picture. Really, we think this in itself demands further research and professional research efforts, studies, fieldwork efforts in the long term to confirm exactly what we're looking at here and the extent of it.
If you're on the outside and you're finding this rather awkward from a professional standpoint, you might say, well, you say all that and yeah, you've got sightings and records, but you don't know the health and the genetic diversity of that population.
That would be true. In doing what we do, we're still a self-funded amateur organisation in that sense. None of us are full-time at doing this, and there's zero funding available for the research and study of even lynx in our environment. We are doing all this off our own back, and nothing yet is known beyond this. We're still at the earliest stages, I think, of really determining exactly how many lynx are out there, how long they've been here within any particular local area, and, as you say, the health state of these animals. There's a plethora of questions. At the moment, I think we have 120 good lynx sightings on the map, going back 1968, but almost half of those are within the past 10 years, and it is showing an uptrend in terms of their sightings, which suggests their population and numbers overall in Scotland.
Now, in terms of the species, are you assuming that a lynx sighting is automatically a Eurasian lynx? And in fact, I have heard gossip today that Canadian lynx have been dumped recently. I don't know whether you've heard that, but of course, other rumours start flying about, don't they, of course, in these kinds of situations?
Some of the lynx sightings we do get are reporting a greyish-brown uniform colour to the back that's suggesting more Canadian lynx as opposed to Eurasian, but some of them are very clearly saying, yep, reddish-brown with black spots, and that's really only leading to Eurasian. Some of them we could be quite confident in saying are Eurasian, others we could suggest are Canadian, and others we don't necessarily have a great deal to go on other than brown or brownish or grey or light coloured, and on that we just can't tell. So exact species wise is still a little bit up in the air. I think we have some ideas on origin stories. We actually have a separate origin stories map which overlays nicely with activity of those species in those areas. Certainly 1976 Dangerous Wild Animals Act, I think unquestionably that's led directly to release events in that year. Some of those could well have been lynx at that time. We have reports of several guerrilla rewilding events that have already taken place in numbers with lynx in different locations as well. So we're quite sure about those stories and that they have happened. And we've even got quite a decent quality print cast following one of those release events that was taken in that area. We would be really speculating if we were to guess either the source or the trade routes these were coming in by. But clearly, any individual, if it's an individual or an organisation, needs a reasonable amount of funding and logistics to be able to bring a number of lynx into the country in the first place and then covertly release.
Would you also buy the prospect of them being bred under the radar within Britain, some of them?
I would say it's possible. We have heard of exotic species being bred under the radar in that sense in the UK, that is quite possible, especially with private collections that are sizable enough for that to be managed.
I think we'll probably have to come back to this topic as more information comes to light from this saga.
The fallout from this, I'm sure you've been snowed under yourself. It's been absolutely crazy. But the amount of sightings that it's brought in. So there's been from our side, that there has been positives from our side, all right. There was a sighting this morning, 3 p.m. today, of a puma in the West Highlands. And only last night, I'd mapped a puma sighting about 10 miles south of this one. And that sighting was from about just over 3 weeks ago. So we think it's the same one or same family, but very clear sightings. I mean, describing the rounded ears and shape of the tail and everything, we're quite certain we're looking at puma. But what blew me away was looking at the map and thinking, where's this one come from? And the nearest was like 30 miles to the east or 30 miles to the south within the past 5 years. So it's just amazing to see movement that way happening over time. From our side, from the research team's side, actually had a bit of a beneficial fallout in terms of us being out there as a point of contact, but sightings coming into us helping populate the map can only help us build the bigger picture.
Well, good luck with that, Paul. It's great you can harness something from it. That's a very neat example of the fallout from this. So we wish you well, Paul, in the future. I'm sure you're going to be busy in the coming days. We'll hear from you again perhaps fairly soon as more developments in the story happen. So we'll get you in at the end of a future podcast perhaps. But we'll certainly hear from you or your colleagues through the year on your general work anyway. Meantime, thanks ever so much for coming on Big Cat Conversations.
No problem. Anytime, Rick.